Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Podcast powered by First National. I am Adam Pawatic here with Aaron Cameron midday at the Canada Apartment Investment Conference. This is part of our speaker video series, of course, sponsored by KingSet, and we thank them for it. We've got a little bit different guest, I guess, than our usual kind of parade of apartment owners that we like to have on. This is a lunchtime speaker, and typically at these events, they look for related topics. David Coletto is the CEO of Abacus Data, and so his world revolves around, public policy, public opinion, trends in real estate. And so this will tie to housing and real estate, of course, because we are sitting at an apartment conference. Mm-hmm. But I'm looking forward to it. So welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So you're a politician?
I am not a politician.
Okay, good. Just making sure.
I am I produce the stuff that politicians say they don't look at but can't get enough of, and that's polls and public opinion research.
Well, I've seen your on Twitter before, or X. I've seen your ads pop up.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
They're reaching the right audience. That's good. That's good.
Why is he the right audience?
Well, we do a lot of work in housing, so I got this amazing job. I get to ask thousands of Canadians hundreds of questions every week on, you name it, topics around politics, what they buy, and how they feel about work, where they're living. And over the last number of years, housing has been one of the most talked about and researched subjects around public policy, politics, and the housing market generally. And so, we put out a lot of content on that, and you probably got caught in the web.
The algorithms identified me.
Weather and real estate. Canadians love weather and real estate. How'd you get into this? What's the story?
Yeah, I mean, I was fascinated by politics in high school. I don't really know the day I said I want to be a pollster, because that's not something people grow up wanting to always be. But I was fascinated by why people voted the way they did, the intersection of curious, why do people think what they do, and went off to university with the intention of doing this at some point in my career, and lucked out, and a little bit of hard work, started my own company over 14 years ago, and now we're in the mix with all the big companies, and we've sort of created a niche for ourselves where we look at public opinion through the lens of public policy and consumer behavior with a real look at generational change as well. So I look way younger than I am.
I was thinking that.
I'm in my 40s, but oftentimes people are still you look like you're 20. But I use that youthful appearance to really dig deep on millennials and Gen Z. And so that's what we became known for, and now we've expanded beyond that. But it's always something I was interested in, and it's kind of cool that I get to.
Do you want to do the science quick so that that can kind of balance or be
it's great.
For the rest of the conversation?
Yeah, so we won't do the full survey research 101, but it's a question I get asked all the time. Can we even measure public opinion accurately anymore? Nobody answers their phones. How do you reach people? I mean, most of the ways we do research, particularly our surveys, are done online. We have access to panels of people who have said they'll answer surveys from time to time. We recruit them typically by email. We have access to about 500,000. And what we're basically trying to do is say, let's say we do a survey of 2,000 Canadians, adults, make that as representative of the population as we can. That is the ultimate goal. And in Canada, most pollsters have been quite accurate at being able to do it. So I'm pretty confident still we can take that small group of people. People always ask, how can you talk to 2,000 people and it be representative of 35 million? Science
and that's
works that
race,
way.
Sex, income levels, the whole
region, even political orientation matters as well. And we're able to do pretty good at that. And our record in terms of, the one time that pollsters are held to account is during elections. And there's been lots of polling failures in the United States. We're talking about the U.S. election all the time, whether the polls are right or wrong. Canada's got a really good record around that.
And so what's your bread and butter? What's the thing that you're typically polling for?
Our bread and butter is what we call public affairs research. So if you are a corporation, if you're a union, an association, you're trying to figure out what is the connection between how people are feeling, what they're thinking about any issue, and the things we care about in terms of particularly government policy, right? And so when you think about housing, for example, why is it that Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, is going out there and hammering, commercial private apartment owners? because there's a demand for somebody to do that because people are feeling anxious about rent and being evicted. So we try to understand not only what people are thinking and why they're thinking it, but how is that affecting the way you engage with the public, you engage with politicians, because those politicians who are making all these decisions are heavily influenced by their perception of public opinion. So it's this like intersection of all of that I think is what we're most known for, but we also do, basically, if you need to ask somebody a question about anything, that's what my team and I do.
And who's most of your clients?
So we work with from unions to big corporations like home builders like Mattamy Homes, for example, or the Canadian Real Estate Association, to the Bank of Canada, to Google is one of our largest clients. So it's a really interesting job being a consultant because you get to get your hands in a lot of different subjects. But again, it comes down to working for people who have a particular challenge and need insights from engaging with different audiences to figure out how to navigate it.
Isn't part of the science, the challenge for the science, not with the science, but for the science, that, let's say I want to know about people's fears of being evicted or rent evicted, or whatever you. But you can't just go out and say, hey, are you afraid of being evicted? Like, it's not that question that you have to ask. You have to ask a whole bunch of other questions that gets the answer to that one. So how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, you sometimes want to do it indirectly, right? So you may do a survey of people who rent, and you might ask what we say in our industry, an open-ended question that says, what's keeping you up at night? And how many of those people say, I think I'm going to get evicted, and I'm worried I'm not going to be able to find another place? We asked this question on our surveys that we're starting to really dig in and understand, is like, what's caught your attention this week and how's it making you feel? And a survey we did 2 weeks ago, there were, out of a 2,000 person sample, a dozen or so people who unprompted said, I worry about the cost of housing. I worry that if I lose my house, if I get evicted, I'm not going to find an affordable place to live. So that's one way. Second way is you start to build a structure of questions that gets you to actually understand, is it a real concern, or is it, if you ask me, how worried am I? Do I like paying taxes? No, right? But are taxes the thing that I think about all the time? Because if I'm thinking about it all the time, that means when I am asked to vote in an election, or if I'm communicating with my member of parliament or my city councillor, that I might bring that up, which then creates the pressure on government to do something about it. So there's tactics and tools we use to get at it. It's not as simple as just saying, how do you feel about X?
Just leading the witness, right?
Yeah. So let's focus on evictions now over here, and we'll keep going around the housing problem. And I'd love to hear your opinion about what you're finding. There's an issue right now. I mean, it's top of mind. There's a CBC article going around about the financialization of housing and how, when we talk about it on this podcast, the lords of the land, these big bad landlords that are out there just profiteering off of, poor Canadians just trying to find a place to sleep. Is that actually the narrative? Like, is that what Canadians, we convince ourselves, perhaps erroneously, in the commercial real estate world, that's really a headline. That's that's news trying to get clicks more than anything else, and that's not actually what Canadians really care about. And then there's a bit of fear mongering going on, and it's really not representative of the challenges that Canadians are worried about.
So the thing I've learned, first of all, as everybody listening to this knows, is how complex housing is as an issue. But there's something, let's take a step first back to understand where the broader mindset is of the public right now, and why that may actually connect with a number of people and make it politically challenging for the sector. And that starts with this idea that I think over the last 2 years, we have seen a mindset emerge in the public around scarcity. Basically, as inflation pushed the cost of everything up, as the housing crisis got worse and became universal, it used to be something we only talked about in Toronto and the Lower Mainland, and now you actually look at even small and rural communities, housing is a top issue in those communities. Add healthcare, add a whole bunch of things, and the basic premise is the things I have come to kind of expect in my life are harder to get, more expensive, and if I have it, I'm very worried I'm going to lose it and not be able to replace it. So with that mindset, and you bring up something like evictions and the question of the motivations of landlords and commercial landlords in particular, the second piece of that is it drives up this notion of zero-sum thinking, that if I'm losing, or if I'm in fear of losing, somebody's winning. Because right now, the environment is so tense and the public is so defensive and the optimism is so low. Like only 1 in 4 Canadians think the country's headed in the right direction. That's lower than it was during the first few weeks of the pandemic. Like when the world was like, I don't know what the heck's gonna go on, and people still felt a little more optimistic about the country then, right? So that just gives context. So if people are feeling that way, then the next question is, how do they feel about business? And I've been doing some really interesting work that's trying to diagnose whether it's those listening and attending this conference today, or those in the broader banking sector, or those in the grocery retailers have been under incredible pressure because this idea that profit is a bad word has emerged. And when we ask people...
Profiteering,
yeah. Right? And so we ask people, do you think, we give people a whole bunch of sectors, retailers, airlines, home builders. I didn't include our sector, but I'm sure if I included, commercial real estate, it would be there too. And apartment owners, do you think they make more profit than they should, make a reasonable amount of profit, or are they unprofitable? And there is a large number of Canadians who think that most sectors make more money than they should. Now, for capitalists, I'm a capitalist, I'm a business owner. My partners do not believe there is too much profit. My goal is to be as successful as I can. But in a mindset where the thinking is you're taking more than you should and I'm losing, that creates the environment where this conversation about financialization of real estate, where rent evictions and politicians can take hold. Politicians, by the way, on the left and the right, can take hold of this, tap into that public anger, and use the sector as basically take a bat and start and not feel that there's any political risk in doing that.
Well, I was about to say a good, you had already kind of identified it when Jagmeet Singh's talking about it, because there's a demand to speak about it. When all politicians from all parties at all levels of government are talking about it, obviously there's significant demand, meaning there's a very significant public sentiment that is the case. Do you look beyond Canada? Do you find the same attitudes in other countries? Do you compare our view of housing here to other countries?
Yeah, I think we're seeing it emerge in the United States. I think they were behind us. We were ahead. We were behind the UK. I think the UK has been having this issue for a number of years. And what unites all of, I think, Western Europe and North America and other parts in Australia, you're seeing it in Australia and New Zealand as well, is this: when you mix a cost of living crisis and deep economic anxiety about the future, you throw in AI, you throw in all these changes, people are just like, holy, excuse my language, shit, let's just slow down and so I can take a breath. And this is all coming out of the pandemic. So we've all shared the same kind of experience, and yet each market's moving at slightly different paces. So I don't think what we're experiencing here is any different. Now, and here's a perfect example. I'm going to sort of segue us into immigration, for example, and why housing and the housing crisis is affecting views around immigration. So Canada's population has, I think, grown faster in the last 2 years than it ever has. That has been a boon to anyone who owns an apartment, because most immigrants come to Canada and they're not buying a home the first day they get here. They're often going to be
any
renters.
Business that sells to consumers
is good. That's a growing population, right? You're a telecom company, you're a grocery store owner, you own an apartment. There are more people, more customers. That's good. That's where our growth has been. The flip side is that all of that scarcity mindset is telling people, well, wait a second. We already knew we had limited amount of housing. Now there's way more people trying to live in the same number of homes, and we can't build fast enough. I don't have a family doctor, but now there's 2 million more people who are going to be looking for one. How much harder will it be to get one? That scarcity has basically turned a year and a half ago, but 1 in 3 Canadians thought our immigration numbers were too high. Today, it's more than doubled to almost 3 in 4. And that then has put pressure on government. And guess what? They're pulling back temporary worker programs. They've capped international student numbers. And there's even talk of turning down the number of permanent residents that Canada is going to welcome. That conversation, if you had asked people in Ottawa, where I live, in the sort of political bubble, they would have said, we will never get there. We won't be like the US or the UK or Australia where we talk about
Probably
immigration.
especially not from the Liberal Party either. That's the really shocking
And
part.
that the fact that Justin Trudeau has said that maybe we made a mistake and we were trying to overcorrect for a labor shortage, and here we are. So that is why I think what I do so valuable, in that we actually saw that coming a year ago and knew that the public was ahead of the politicians. And so the market signaled something, and the politicians just are often slow to respond to it, but they eventually do.
Can we go on a complete tangent?
Go for it.
Just for a second. For the people, by the people. So I get that. And your job is offering sort of an insight to what the people think, so that the people that are elected by the people can, make decisions for
Say
them.
people again.
People.
But isn't it kind of broken? Because isn't the idea that you're supposed to be an elected official to make decisions based on what you think is in the best interest, not what they want? And so and I'm not trying to talk you out of a job, you know what I mean? But it's cool that they think that, but is that really what's right? Because great, that collection of 2,000 people, do they actually know what the best thing is for Canada? No, they just know what they think.
Like your kids eat sugar for every meal.
Yeah, exactly, right?
But I think, but I don't think leaders, whether you're running a business or you're running a country, should only make your decisions based on what your workers or your constituents want. Because to your point, I know, because I asked them, most people have no clue about how the world works. Their perceptions about what's going on are nowhere near reality. Now, the problem we face, though, is in a world like I've described, right? The fact that someone like Donald Trump can become president of the United States is because nobody trusts the people who actually know what they're talking about. That we've lost this deference to people in positions of expertise. Like the word elite is a bad word, right? Unless you're talking about an elite athlete. But elite everything else is like, oh, you don't understand me. You're out of touch. You don't get me. So I agree with you. I think there's often a place for leadership for somebody, whether it's an industry leader, a political leader, to say, no, this is where we need to go. The problem for the current federal government and why they are responding to public opinion instead of leading it is because they have no public support. Justin Trudeau's deeply unpopular. He's got no political capital left. And so
you basically you're at a whim. Whatever they want me to say, I'll say.
Yeah, he's like, he is the boat without a rudder who's simply pushed by where the wind's taking him, and let him, instead of him mapping, I want to go here.
Yeah.
And so that's why you're seeing.
Here's the thing. A lot of our listeners, a lot of the guests here at the Canadian Department of Investment Conference are apartment owners, and ultimately, are housing Canadians, and so are interested in what Canadians think. Public opinion, market opinions, market research. What else are you seeing in sort of your day-to-day and all the research that you guys are doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think demographics, the population shifts, these are all good insights to get a sense of like, where's our market going in the short term, medium term, long term. And there's a few things I noted. We talked about immigration earlier. I think we need to be prepared for slower growth in terms of our population. I think the political pressure is just going to be immense, and until we catch up on housing, healthcare, and cool people's anxiety, that's just going to be where we are. So what has been the top source of new renters and tenants immigration is not going to disappear. I just don't think we're going to see this kind of flood or fire hose of new people coming to the country. That being said, I'm still incredibly bullish on Canada, and I think there's a few things I look at. One is there's an immense generation of people many of whom own their homes, who are figuring out what to do as they downsize. I'm talking about my parents' generation, I think our parents' generations, those boomers, right? So where are they going to go? Where are they going to live? How does the market serve them? Because I don't think it's serving them really well yet, and they're aging very quickly, to the point where the stat I repeat almost everywhere I go is the number of Canadians aged 85 and older is going to triple in the next 10 years, right? That is a huge market opportunity. Not all of them are going to instantly need long-term care. They're going to need some place to live that better serves their life. And at every stage of this generation's life cycle stage, we have underestimated their impact. So if you're an enterprising apartment owner listening to this, figure out how do you serve that boomer market.
If you want an example, drive around any neighborhood in any parts of Canada for the most part, and there are all sorts of these city-owned community centers that look like they used to be a public school. And they were built because of the baby boomer generation, and that we no longer needed them. And now they're still sitting there 60 years later as a community center or something else.
And maybe they've been turned into a senior center because
perhaps,
those same boomers who went to school there are now coming and hanging out and playing cards and figuring what to do with, for many of them, all the money and all the time that they have, right? They got a lot of resources. Now, some of them, and this is where I think there's an opportunity, and why the equity they may have in their home won't all be able to be used for their retirement, and so they're going to be looking for affordable accommodation, is because they're often needing to leverage that to buy the house for their kids or their grandkids, because the housing market and that dream of ownership is still there. So that's one opportunity I see. I see a number of other markets that, beyond the Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal markets, that are interesting. I think we continue to see, because of what I think will be the normal now of some version of hybrid work for people who can do it, willing to live in more suburban or exurban communities. So are we going to see increased numbers of apartments and rental options in communities where we may not have normally seen that? I think there are places in Atlantic Canada like Halifax that are growing rapidly because people want to move to these kind of smaller, more dynamic places. So a mix of this demographic shift plus certain markets emerging, I think, is interesting. The last thing I'll say is, and I think this is tied to the discussion about the financialization of real estate, and I think is a fair criticism, perhaps, of everyone listening here to think about, is there is increased talk that the market is not responding to the needs of the consumer because it's about investment and making money, as opposed to creating housing that works. I think there's some interesting creative stuff that can be done with younger generations who have probably more flexibility, and building the kind of accommodations and housing and thinking about co-ownership and creative tools that kind of that blow up the dichotomy between owning and renting. And something in between, I think, is going to be where there's also going to be interesting opportunities to and already are, I think, being done, and looking how to scale those.
Because the Canadian, since you're born, it's buy a home, buy a home, buy a home, and the rapidly growing renter class is at odds with that, right? The messaging in Canada is, well, you're renting until you own.
Yeah.
And some of these types you're talking about, obviously, would address that. Not to put any cold water on it, lending will be a barrier to that, because lenders don't like anything new. They like to have the existing. Happens very slowly. And even the housing changes are very slow just because of the capital involved, the time involved, the approvals involved. But I always think about that with real estate. I would love to just be able to kind of, be put into a medically induced coma for 80 years and come back and then see all the changes, because it all happens so slowly. But so how
called Encino Man.
But you could have that kind of revolutionary change over 5 decades, but it won't feel like that for us living through it. But it would be from somebody who hadn't seen where it was before.
Maybe talk about some of the generational differences you're seeing in your research as it relates to housing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I started doing research on housing and generations 8-9 years ago, when it was a millennial problem. When, if you were born between 1980 and 2000, housing was everything. You were trying to get into the market. There was the first instances of Canadians feeling that dream wasn't going to be easily met. You now have seen that concern expand across the entire age spectrum. So whether you are, even I think now they're terming Gen Alpha, the new post-Gen X generation, who are 12, 13, 14-year-olds now, already are becoming acclimatized to the idea that housing is going to be the thing that's, ownership in particular, while something they want to aspire to, maybe not going to happen for them. All the way up to boomers who are trying to figure out how to get their kids and now their grandkids into homes and everything in between. So it's a universal problem. But it's being experienced very differently, right? So you've got my parents, for example, who live in a 4-bedroom house in Richmond Hill, Ontario, who do not need that home, who have the equity there, which I don't need it, but I would like some of it eventually. They need to get it out and hand it down to, they don't know where to go. They literally
They don't know what to do with it.
They don't know where to move. Condos are too small. The bungalows don't exist. And so there are millions and millions of people in that category, and I don't know if the market can respond to that, but I do see an opportunity there. So generationally, I think there's differences in experience and intensity of concern, but at the fundamental core, I think now everybody agrees this is a problem, and is putting pressure on all actors, whether you're government, whether you're industry, whether you're in the not-for-profit side of the business, to do something. And that's creating that political pressure.
What are you most interested in researching and polling? What area of the market upcoming and then over the next couple of years that you want to explore and get answers on are you most excited
Yeah, what
about?
hypothesis do you want to prove that you kind of deduced over your last couple of years?
I mean, it sounds like a little bit of a downer perspective, but I am both concerned and fascinated by what happens to younger generations who believe that older ones have basically blocked their ability to have the same kind of life. Like, I think we have entered a period, and housing is the definition by which people, I think, are judging their ability to live as good a life as the generation that came before them.
That's a hallmark of success for
Right?
sure, yeah.
Like, for the last 100 years, I think every generation that came after one said, I'm going to do better. I can do better. The opportunities are there. I don't think that's the case for anyone under the age of 25 today. I think they look at the world and say, climate change, political instability, housing crisis. Like, what the heck are you guys leaving me with? What is the consequence of that in every market, political, labor, and in the consumer market? Because I think that is, to me, something we don't yet know, but we're seeing evidence of it kind of.
Were they disenfranchised?
Become disenfranchised? Do they organize and force change by coming together?
And voting in numbers, yeah.
Yeah, both with their pocketbooks
Or stop
and their
voting
demands
altogether?
at
Or
work.
stop
Like,
voting altogether?
I
Yeah.
think of it as an employer. Like, how do I engage my employees who are deeply skeptical or questioning everything I do, who look at me and say, you had it way better than I do. So don't you dare say I'm entitled and lazy, and because you don't know what my life's like. And then the mental health element that goes all around that. I think it's fascinating as a researcher, but also I'm concerned that, like, the stability that we've kind of assumed is the hallmark of Canada. Despite our diversity, we've been stable and we're a good place to invest, and we've got a bright future ahead of us. We don't tackle that.
Hasn't every generation worried about the next generation's stability, mental health, and it all kind of worked out? Not to disagree.
No, you're right. I mean, I think sometimes people like say that Socrates or Plato said, "Oh, look at the kids these days. Like, they're all a bunch of lazy do-nothings," and there's truth there. You can go back and look at, like, Time magazine cover stories that describe, like,
all the
boomers.
hippies, and we're doomed. All these guys smoking, like, and those were our parents, and look, they did okay, right?
And I think the positive side is, like, human beings are incredibly resilient and durable and figure it out and adapt. But, like, you cannot look around the world today and say something is happening that's creating this friction that's causing a whole bunch of other stuff to be just harder for us to navigate. And in the Canadian context, where things are way better, and we forget sometimes to actually say, I'd much rather be born now than 50 years ago. But that's not the perception. I asked that question in my survey. It's like the most interesting question I think I've ever asked is, would you be rather born today or in 1950?
Yeah, that's an interesting
Adam.
one.
Today, for sure today.
Yeah, today. It would
Yeah?
be today,
Well,
yeah.
you are on the other side of public opinion,
Yeah.
because 2/3 of Canadians say 1950, including half of those under 30.
Where women can't vote. Where
If you are a person of color, you can't even use, in some states in the United States, the same water fountain.
The health
right?
systems don't know anything.
Where my grandmother
Yeah.
worried that my dad would die of polio when he was born. Like, we have come so far, and yet the idea is, oh, it was so much better back then. Hence the Make America Great Again, the Make Canada Great Again framing. So what gets us optimistic again, I think, is the question that's going to guide my work. Like, it's aside from my, like, paid work, is like my mission is to figure out, because I'm an optimistic guy, how do I get more people to say, yeah, we got problems and we got to solve them, and we can only solve them if we work together, but man, things are still pretty good. Like, I get to see the world. I get to breathe clean air. And yeah, climate change is a real problem, but we got somebody on the moon. We can solve anything because we're pretty smart people. Anyways.
I love it. I
Cool.
love that
Let's
answer.
end there. That's awesome.
That's a high note.
Yeah.
That's
End
a
there.
sick note.
Yeah, end there. We're ending there. David.
Mic drop.
Yeah, that was a mic drop. You can stand up and walk away now. Thanks to KingSep for sponsoring the speaker video series here at the Canadian Investment Apartment Conference. Thanks to First National powering the podcast. And again, Dave, thanks for coming on. That was great.
Thanks for having me. It's all fun.
Good luck on your presentation coming up. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.